Our next scripture reading comes from the Gospel of John, chapter 10, verses 11 through 18. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand, who is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and runs away. And the wolf snatches them and scatters them. The hired hand runs away because the hired hand does not care for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father. And I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that do not belong to this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock, one shepherd. For this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life in order to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have power to lay it down, and I have power to take it up again. I have received this command from my Father. The grass withers and the flower fades, but the word of the Lord lives forever. And this is the word of the Lord. All thanks be to God. So this week, in the season of resurrection, we are called back into an earlier conversation in Jesus' story. An earlier teaching that he shared about who he is, about who he is not, and about what that means for us. Particularly now, what it means in light of the resurrection. As Jesus appears in the garden, along the road, in locked rooms, around fires, eating with us, blessing us with peace, and sending us with his blessing and authority to do his work, we brush up against this question: who is this fellow? Who was he while he walked on this earth? Who is he now he's walking this earth again after he was killed? And who will he be in days to come? So to answer that question, we're drawn back into the story, back into the words that he shared before. We're called to remember. We're called to put the pieces together. Last week in an experience with the risen Lord, as he appeared, it wasn't in seeing the risen Christ, risen from the dead, that gave the disciples understanding and peace. It was kind of opening the doors to it. But they were still shocked. They were still in wonder. What gave them understanding and peace was in remembering the stories and the teachings of old. Remembering the things that Jesus himself said. Putting it all together to understand that it wasn't, that what they were seeing in the risen Lord with their own eyes was seeing God's promises themselves come true. It was in remembering and putting the pieces together that they were blessed and with understanding and that inner peace that they were needing so desperately. But wait, there's still more. Much of their understanding and peace was due to a sense of belonging. A sense of belonging that was beyond anything they'd ever felt. Belonging. It's a basic and primal need of ours as human beings. We need to belong to something, to belong to one another, to our friends and family, to our culture and our country, to our world, to something with meaning and purpose. I'm not the best person to describe the opposite of belonging, that being loneliness. Even at times when I've been most alone, most separated, most on my own, deep down I always knew I was still connected. Deep down I always knew that I still belonged somewhere, to my family, to my church, to my close friends. There were always people I could call upon. I don't know for myself that very real, very heartbreaking feeling of loneliness where there really isn't anybody there for you. I don't know that feeling. But it's plain as day all around us. People who truly lack that sense of belonging. Kids who do poorly in school and act out just because nobody's paying attention. Teens who join gangs to find something they're not finding at home. The one who commits suicide for being constantly rejected and bullied by the in crowd. And beyond what we see and hear about day to day, extensive research spells out for us the impact that it has on a human being with how hard it is on your well-being, on your IQ performance, on your self-control, on your motivation, on your willingness and likelihood to hang in there in the face of obstacles. Lacking that sense of belonging has a striking impact. Herein lies the power of today's scripture. We are the sheep. We belong to the Good Shepherd. I ran across a story of a father named Timothy in a family who adopted a little girl. I'd like to share it with you to explore a little further the human need for a sense of belonging. He says, I never dreamed that taking a child to Disney World could be so difficult. Or that such a trip could teach me so much about God's outrageous grace. Our middle daughter had been previously adopted by another family. I'm sure this couple had the best of intentions, but they never quite integrated this child into their family of biological children. After a couple of rough years, they dissolved the adoption. And we ended up welcoming an 8-year-old girl into our home. For one reason or another, whenever our daughter's previous family vacationed at Disney World, they took their biological children with them, but they left their adopted daughter with a family friend. Usually, at least in the child's mind, this happened because she did something wrong. And so, by the time we adopted our daughter, she'd seen many pictures of Disney World. She'd heard about the rides and the characters and all the parades. But when it came to passing through the gates of the Magic Kingdom, she had always been the one left on the outside. Once I found out about this history, I made plans to take her to Disney World. Now, I thought I had mastered the Disney World drill. I knew from previous experiences that the prospect of seeing cast members in freakishly oversized mouse and duck costumes somehow turns children into squirreling bundles of emotional instability. What I didn't expect was that the prospect of visiting this dream world would produce a stream of downright devilish behavior in our newest daughter. In the month leading up to our trip to the Magic Kingdom, she stole food when a simple request would have gotten her a snack. She lied when it would have been easier to tell the truth. She whispered insults that were carefully crafted to hurt her older sister as deeply as possible. And as the days on the calendar moved closer to the trip, her mutinies multiplied. A couple days before our family headed to Florida, I pulled our daughter into my lap to talk through her latest escapade. I know what you're going to do, she stated flatly. You're not going to take me to Disney World, are you? The thought hadn't actually crossed my mind, but her downward spiral suddenly started to make sense. She knew she couldn't earn her way to Magic Kingdom. She had tried and failed that test several times before. So she was living in a way that placed her as far as possible from the most magical place on earth. In retrospect, I'm embarrassed to admit that in that moment I was tempted to turn her fear into my own advantage. The easiest response would have been, if you don't start behaving better, you're right, we won't take you. But by God's grace, I didn't. Instead, I asked her, is this trip something we're doing as a family? She nodded, brown eyes wide and tearing up. Are you part of this family? She nodded again. Then you're going with us. Sure, there may be some consequences to help you remember what's right and what's wrong, but you're part of our family. We're not leaving you behind. I'd like to say that her behaviors grew better after that moment. They didn't. Her choices pretty much spiraled out of control at every hotel and every rest stop all the way to Lake Buena Vista. Still, we headed to Disney World on the day that we promised. It was the typical Disney day. Overpriced tickets, overpriced meals, lots of lines mingled with just enough manufactured magic to consider maybe going again someday. In our hotel room that evening, a very different child emerged. She was exhausted, a little weepy at times, but her month-long facade of rebellion had faded. When bedtime rolled around, I prayed with her, I held her, and I asked, so how was your first day at Disney World? She closed her eyes. She snuggled down into her stuffed unicorn. After a few moments, she opened her eyes ever so slightly, said, Daddy, I finally got to go to Disney World. But it wasn't because I was good. It's because I'm yours. As we gather in light of the resurrection, we are invited to pause and think, to put it all together, to understand what this means, to belong to someone who cares about us, someone who knows us personally even better than we know ourselves, someone who protects us, someone who seeks us out when we get lost, someone who has already laid down his life for us. We belong to someone who loves us unconditionally, someone who calls us to love each other unconditionally. That someone is the culmination of everything that's gone before. That someone is eternal. That someone is the Good Shepherd. That someone is Jesus. With Jesus is where we belong. In God's sheepfold of love is where we belong. And nothing, I mean nothing, can ever change that. In light of the resurrection, may God bless you with understanding and peace. Amen.